The sun bled low across the horizon, staining the sky with fire as drums echoed faintly from the heart of the village. It was not a sound of celebration but of mockery. In the square, where children usually played and elders gathered for counsel, a tall pole had been planted deep into the earth. Upon it hung a dress, once fine, once bright, once belonging to a young woman who was the subject of every whisper that slithered through the village. The dress had been torn at the seams, its edges muddied and frayed, its beauty stripped as cruelly as the girl herself had been. A group of women clapped and laughed, pointing at the garment swaying faintly in the evening breeze. "Look," one sneered, "the cursed one's spirit will cling to that rag, not to us." Children jeered and threw pebbles at it, their voices sharp and merciless. Men drank palm wine by the fire, shaking their heads, pretending to laugh though unease flickered in their eyes. 4 days, misfortunes had plagued the village. Goats had gone missing, storms had swept through fields, and children had fallen sick without reason. The elders did not blame the sky, nor the failing soil. They blamed her. The young woman of 23 years, quiet but strong, too beautiful in her grace, too clever in her weaving, too different to be safe. Rumors had twisted her name into a curse, and now the proof of their judgment hung in front of them, her dress fluttering like a flag of shame. "She has vanished," someone whispered, huddled close to the fire. "Into the forest. Maybe the spirits finally took her." "No," another voice replied with grim satisfaction, "the spirits would not want her. She has gone to rot in the dark." But no matter what words were spoken, every villager kept their eyes on that dress. Its faded patterns caught the dying sunlight, and for a moment, it looked almost alive. At the edge of the gathering, an old woman shook her head slowly. Her voice cracked like dry wood when she muttered, "You mock her now, but the sky hears laughter as clearly as it hears cries. The earth remembers every cruelty." Her warning was drowned in laughter, swallowed in the fire's glow. No one wanted wisdom. They wanted a scapegoat. As darkness thickened, the village seemed to breathe differently. The air grew heavy and the drums fell silent one by one. Yet the mocking did not stop. Children continued to dance around the pole, singing cruel rhymes. The dress, thin and torn, swayed against the pole like a body without bones. A man spat at the ground and said loudly, "Let it stay there through the night. By dawn, the shame will cling to her spirit wherever she hides." The fire popped. A dog howled in the distance. Still the villagers laughed, feeding their fear with cruelty, desperate to prove to themselves that they were safe because she was gone. But somewhere in the hush between laughter, someone swore they heard the faintest rustle, not of fabric swaying in wind, but of footsteps too soft to belong to any living thing. The dress hung still, pale in the firelight. And the night, darker than most, pressed close around the village as though it were listening. Before her dress was hung on the pole, before the laughter and the cruel songs, there had been a girl who walked through the village with quiet dignity. She was not loud, nor boastful, nor arrogant, but her beauty carried a light that could not be ignored. Her skin glowed deep like polished earth after rain, her eyes calm yet sharp, as though they carried secrets from generations past. And her hands wove patterns into cloth that made people pause. Bright reds, deep blues, threads glinting like trapped sunlight. She was only 23, but her work was sought after even beyond her own village. And that was the beginning of her trouble. The other women watched her with envy as she sat beneath the baobab tree, weaving cloth with patience and grace. Her stepmother, sharp-tongued and bitter, felt her own daughters shrinking in comparison. No one praised their work. No one spoke of their beauty. It was always her. The stepmother's smile grew thinner with each compliment the girl received, until one day she no longer smiled at all. When the rains failed, when the ground cracked under the burning sun, whispers began to circle like vultures. "Perhaps she weaves more than cloth," someone muttered. "Perhaps she weaves curses." A child fell ill soon after, his skin hot as fire, and the whispers grew teeth. "She is the cause," the stepmother hissed to anyone who would listen. "Her beauty is not a blessing, it is a snare. Her weaving is not skill, it is witchcraft. Fear is a seed easily planted in weary soil." The villagers, already weakened by poor harvests and sleepless nights, let the rumors take root. When goats went missing, they said she had taken their spirits. When storms battered the roofs, they said her shadow had called the wind. When two brothers quarreled until blood was drawn, they claimed her gaze had poisoned their bond. At first, some resisted. "She has done no harm," one elder argued. "She works, she prays, she helps her neighbors." But the stepmother was patient. She leaned on their fears, reminding them of every misfortune, weaving her own cruel story until even the doubtful began to nod. Soon, whenever the young woman entered the square, voices would quiet. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men muttered under their breath. Children sang mocking songs behind her back. The stepmother watched it all with satisfaction, her lips curled in triumph. But humiliation, she believed, was sharper than any blade. She did not want only to accuse the girl, she wanted to break her. So when the council debated punishment, when elders asked, "What shall we do?" the stepmother gave her answer with venom wrapped in honey. "Do not strike her down," she said. "That would anger the spirits. No, let us strip her pride. Let us show her she is nothing. Hang her dress in the square so all may laugh. Let her spirit know she is no longer welcome among us." The villagers, desperate for relief, desperate to believe the curse could be mocked away, agreed. And so the laughter began. It was not born of joy but of fear disguised as scorn. They could not face the storms, nor the sickness, nor the famine. But they could face her. They could laugh at her torn dress swinging in the wind. They could spit her name like poison on their tongues. They could reduce her to nothing more than cloth on a pole. The seed had been planted, watered with envy, nourished with lies. And now it grew tall, casting its shadow across the village. The night before the villagers hung her dress on the pole, the stepmother gathered her circle of whisperers. They came like shadows, their faces hard with envy and fear, their hearts eager for cruelty disguised as justice. Torches flared in the darkness as they dragged the girl from her small hut. She cried out for mercy, but her voice was drowned by their jeers. They drove her into the forest at the edge of the village, the place where the trees grew thick and the air felt heavy, where even hunters moved carefully. "This is where you belong," the stepmother hissed, shoving her forward. "Among shadows and spirits. You will not poison our village anymore." The girl stumbled, barefoot on roots and stones, but she held her head high. Her silence was her defiance. Each time the torchlight caught her face, they saw no tears, only a steady, wounded pride. That only enraged the stepmother more. They taunted her as they stripped away the garment she wore, the one she had woven herself with patient hands, threads dyed deep with color. They tore it until the fabric hung in ragged strips. The stepmother clutched the ruined dress as though it were a prize. "This," she said coldly, "will be all that remains of you. Tomorrow the whole village will laugh when they see it flying from a pole." The girl stood shivering in her undergarments, the night air cold against her skin, but still she did not beg. "You cannot silence truth," she whispered, her voice trembling yet strong. "Even if you bury me, the earth will speak." Her words unsettled them. For a moment no one laughed. Even the stepmother faltered, clutching the torn dress tighter. But fear makes people cruel. They shoved her deeper into the forest, into the dark places where no paths ran, where the trees tangled like cages. "Go," one man spat. "Go and join the spirits you call." She turned once, her eyes catching the torchlight. For those who saw it, that look burned into their memory, not hatred but something older, stronger, as if she had glimpsed a truth beyond them. Then the shadows swallowed her. The villagers waited, listening for the sound of her footsteps, for the crack of branches as she walked away. But the forest answered only with silence. No scream. No cry. No sound of running. It was as though she had vanished into the night itself. Fear prickled along their skin. One whispered, "Did she walk away, or was she taken?" Another muttered, "We should not be here." The stepmother silenced them with a hiss. "She is gone. That is all that matters." But even her voice shook faintly. Clutching the torn dress like a trophy, she led them back to the village. No one spoke of what they had seen, but unease weighed heavy in their hearts. By dawn they would hang the dress for all to mock, proof of their victory. Yet deep inside, some wondered if the forest had claimed her, or if she had gone willingly into the dark, carrying a secret no one could name. The young woman was never seen again. Only the empty square, the swinging dress, and the whispers of the villagers remained. And as the night faded, the first to wake swore they heard something strange carried on the wind. A low hum, almost like a woman's voice, drifting from the forest where she had vanished. The next evening, the square filled with laughter sharper than knives. At the center, towering above all, stood a wooden pole planted deep into the earth. From it, the girl's torn dress fluttered, swaying in the dusty wind. Once it had been a garment of beauty woven with care and color. Now it hung in tatters, a banner of cruelty, its fabric whispering with every breeze. Children danced beneath it, pointing, clapping, singing mock songs made up of the lies they had heard from their elders. The cursed girl, they chanted, tossing pebbles at the cloth as though it were an enemy to be stoned. Their high voices cut through the night air, carrying mockery where once there had been reverence. Men sat in groups with clay cups of millet beer, laughing loudly, slapping their thighs as if this humiliation were a festival. Women whispered, trading rumors as easily as breath, that the girl had vanished into the trees to meet demons, that her beauty had been stolen by spirits, that she had cursed the soil of the harvest before she left. Every word piled higher until the truth was buried under laughter and malice. The stepmother stood near the pole, her lips curling in triumph. Every time the fabric twisted in the air, she felt a surge of satisfaction, as though the girl's presence had been erased, replaced only by shame. "This is what comes of pride," she told the villagers. "This is what comes of crossing me." Her words sank into the crowd like poison, shaping the memory of the night. Yet not everyone laughed. In the shadows, a few elders sat quietly, their eyes fixed uneasily on the swaying garment. They said nothing, but in their silence there was dread. One muttered under his breath, "It is not wise to mock what is not understood." But his words were lost in the noise. As the night deepened, the air grew strange. The warmth of the day drained away, and a sharp chill crept into the square. The villagers did not notice at first, drunk on cruelty and drink. But the children shivered as they played, their songs slowing, their voices faltering. The cloth on the pole rippled though no wind stirred. A cloud passed over the moon, dimming the light. Someone laughed nervously, pointing. "Look, it dances with us." But even as they said it, the air thickened. The sky above, once clear and full of stars, began to gather with heavy, silent clouds. Their bellies swelled with a storm not yet spoken. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, low and warning. The villagers grew louder, as if to drown the omen. More drink, more laughter, more cruel songs. But the pole seemed taller now, the dress larger, swaying with a rhythm that did not match the wind. Every flicker of lantern light caught on its ragged edges, making it seem alive, as if it might twist and turn on its own. And then, just before midnight, silence spread without warning. The drums stopped. The children stopped. Even the laughter of the men dried in their throats. All eyes turned to the pole where the dress still hung. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long across the square, dark and sharp against the earth. Above, the clouds had gathered thick and heavy, pressing low, as if the sky itself leaned closer to watch. Night settled heavy over the village, the kind of silence that feels alive. The fires had burned low, leaving only glowing embers, and the drunken laughter of the earlier mocking had died into uneasy sleep. Yet the square did not rest. The torn dress still hung from the pole, its edges ragged, its colors faded by dust and torch smoke. But in the dim moonlight, it seemed to breathe. With every faint shimmer of the cloth, the air around it grew colder, as if the fabric carried the memory of the girl who once wore it. It began with whispers. Not clear words, but sounds caught in the wind, too low to understand. Some said it was the rustle of the trees beyond the huts. Others swore it came from the square itself. A woman awoke in the night, shivering, and shook her husband. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. He frowned, listening. At first he heard nothing. But then, a soft rhythm like footsteps dragging across the ground. Slow. Measured. Coming from the direction of the pole. The man muttered a prayer and pulled the blanket over his head, refusing to listen. But the woman kept her eyes wide, staring into the darkness through the crack in the door, where the outline of the pole stood against the moon. She swore she saw the dress shift, though the air was still and no wind stirred. Elsewhere dogs began to howl. Not playful barks, but long, mournful cries, their bodies stiff with fear. They gathered near the edge of the square, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the hanging garment. Their voices echoed into the night, sharp and wild, carrying dread into every hut. Children stirred in their sleep, whimpering, calling out for mothers who hushed them quickly, afraid to admit they too heard the whispers in the wind. An elder rose to his feet, heart pounding, and stepped outside. He stood still, listening, and his face drained of color. He could hear it clearly now, not just footsteps but faint breathing as though someone invisible circled the pole. "Who walks at this hour?" he whispered to himself, clutching the staff in his hand. But no answer came, only the dragging sound, steady, deliberate. The elder retreated quickly into his hut, muttering prayers under his breath. The stepmother, restless in her bed, awoke to the sound of the dogs howling. Annoyed, she stepped outside, her jaw tight with anger. "Foolish beasts," she hissed. But as her eyes fell on the square, her breath caught. The dress was swaying. Not gently, not with the air, but sharply, as if tugged from within. She blinked, heart racing, telling herself it was her imagination. Still, the whispers rode the wind, growing clearer, closer, wrapping around her ears like threads she could not shake. Her blood chilled when she thought she heard her name carried in that breathless murmur. She staggered back inside, shutting the door with trembling hands. By midnight, no one slept soundly. The square had become a place of dread, though none dared go near it. The footsteps came and went, circling endlessly, sometimes quickening, sometimes pausing as though something searched the ground. A lantern flickered and died on its own. The pole creaked as if under weight, though nothing visible touched it. And then, just before dawn, a new sound pierced the silence, the faint rustle of cloth dragging across the dirt. Every dog in the village fell silent at once. Villagers held their breath, listening in terror. The dress had shifted again, sharper this time, its tatters twisting as though some unseen body had moved inside it. For a moment, in the pale glow of the moon, it almost seemed to stand, not hang. The whispers grew louder, clearer, wrapping the square in an unearthly murmur. Those who listened swore the words were not of men but of spirits, voices that promised the night was not yet done. Midnight came with a roar of thunder. Lightning cracked across the sky, a jagged vein of fire that split the heavens and lit the village square in a harsh, white blaze. For an instant, the pole and the torn dress shone stark against the darkness, every thread visible. And in that brief flash, the villagers who dared to look swore they saw something impossible, the fabric billowing not from wind, but as though something inside it stretched and stirred. The silence that followed the thunder was suffocating. Not even the dogs howled. The air pressed down, thick with the smell of rain yet to fall. Then the dress rippled again, slow and deliberate, as though lungs beneath invisible ribs had taken a breath. The pole creaked. An elder, peering from the crack of his hut, pressed his trembling hands together. "Spirits," he whispered hoarsely. His wife pulled the blanket over her head, but even she could hear the rustle of fabric moving against wood. Another bolt of lightning came, this one closer, blinding in its brilliance. For a heartbeat, the entire square blazed like daylight. And in that light, the dress shifted downward, sliding along the pole as though unseen hands guided it. The tatters dragged, catching on the wood, then freed themselves. When the light faded, the fabric no longer hung at the top of the pole but midway down, swaying gently, eerily, like something alive. A child, awake and restless, looked from the doorway of his hut and gasped. "Mama," he whispered, "the dress is climbing down." His mother silenced him with a trembling hand, but she did not dare look herself. The night thickened. Thunder rolled again, closer this time, shaking the earth. The villagers held their breath as the dress gave a final, deliberate slip, sliding off the pole entirely. It fell not like cloth but like a body, soft, heavy, deliberate, landing on the dirt with a muffled thud. The sound traveled through the square, unmistakable. But it did not stay there. Slowly, impossibly, the garment lifted itself from the ground. First one sleeve, then another, as though arms pressed outward, filling the emptiness. The tatters stretched, curved, taking on the shape of shoulders, the outline of a chest. The torn hem brushed the earth, yet the dress no longer crumpled as cloth should. It stood upright, as though draped over invisible flesh. Whispers rose again, louder now, weaving through the huts like a cold wind. Some villagers covered their ears, but the sound seeped into their bones. The dogs began to bark again, but their cries turned to whines as they retreated into the shadows, tails tucked, terrified. The stepmother stirred in her hut, unable to sleep. A sudden chill passed over her, and her heart hammered as if it knew what her eyes had yet to see. She crept to the doorway and looked out. And there, in the pale glow of moonlight and storm, she saw it. The dress standing in the square, upright and breathing, swaying ever so slightly as if invisible legs shifted beneath it. Her mouth went dry. "No, no, it cannot be." But even as she whispered, the truth loomed undeniable. Another flash of lightning lit the square, and for that single heartbeat, the impossible became clear. The tatters clung to a shape, the faint outline of a body that should not exist. The air shimmered around it, bending light, as though the world itself strained to contain the figure. The villagers who saw it pressed themselves against their hut walls, unwilling to move, unwilling to speak. Yet their eyes stayed fixed on the dress, horror and awe rooting them to the spot. The dress shifted again. One footstep forward, silent yet unmistakable. The hem dragged in the dirt. Another step followed. The pole behind it creaked, now empty, abandoned. It was walking. And with every step, the whispers in the air grew louder, rising in a chorus that no human tongue could form. The village held its breath, paralyzed. They had mocked her, shamed her, erased her. But the night had called her back, clothed in nothing but memory and fury. By dawn none would deny it. The dress was no longer a garment. It was her. The first scream ripped through the night like a blade. It came from a woman who had risen to fetch water, only to see the impossible swaying toward her. The sound pierced every hut, jolting the village awake. Doors creaked, eyes blinked into the stormlit dark, and then silence fell again, heavy, waiting. And then they saw it. The dress moved through the square with slow, deliberate steps, each one dragging the hem across the dirt. Lightning cracked above, and with every strike, a jagged chain of light seemed to descend, linking itself to the fabric, clinging like shackles of fire. The air stank of ozone, sharp and metallic, as though the storm itself had chosen to bind her spirit. The villagers gasped, some covering their mouths, others clutching their children to their chests. No one dared move. The figure walked without sound, yet the ground seemed to tremble beneath her steps, each one louder than thunder in their minds. "Spirits protect us," an elder whispered, collapsing to his knees. His voice shook, his staff rattling against the earth. Others followed, falling into desperate prayer, foreheads pressed to the ground, muttering chants for forgiveness, for mercy, for the storm to take them instead. But not all prayed. Some fled. Men ran stumbling through the narrow paths between huts. Women clutched their children and vanished into the forest's edge, their feet bare and bleeding on stones as they sought any escape from the sight. Their cries tangled with the howling wind, a chorus of terror carried away into the night. The dogs barked wildly, then whimpered and scattered, refusing to look at the figure moving across the square. The lanterns flickered and blew out one by one, as though some unseen hand snuffed them, until the only light left was the wild glow of lightning lashing across the sky. The stepmother stood at her doorway, frozen. Her eyes fixed on the swaying dress, on the jagged chains of light sparking around it. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but her feet would not move. The sight pinned her where she stood, her body trembling, her teeth clattering like stones. Closer and closer the figure came, its fabric whispering as though 1,000 voices spoke from its threads. The whispers slipped into every ear, carrying words no one could fully understand but all could feel: accusation, sorrow, rage. A boy pointed with a shaking hand. "It's her," he whimpered. His mother slapped his hand down and pulled him close, tears streaking her face. "Do not say her name," she hissed. But it was too late. Everyone knew. The dress did not walk alone, it walked filled, alive with what they had tried to bury. The storm grew heavier, lightning dancing almost playfully across the square, sparking at the hem of the garment. Each step the figure took left a hiss of scorched earth, faint trails glowing as if the ground itself acknowledged her return. Some tried to stand against it, a group of young men clutched spears, trembling as they raised them. But when the next bolt of lightning cracked, blinding and deafening, the spears split in their hands, the wood bursting into splinters. They fell to the ground screaming, fleeing into the dark. One by one, the villagers realized resistance was useless. This was no trick, no shadow, no wind playing with cloth. This was her. The woman they mocked, the spirit they tried to erase, come back clothed in her shame, now walking with the storm itself as her crown. And as the figure passed through the square, the air grew colder still, the whispers louder, until the entire village quaked beneath the sound. Some lay flat, sobbing. Others vanished into the forest. But no one dared approach. For in that moment they all knew, the dress walked not to wander but to judge. The storm raged above, but inside the stepmother's chest, a storm fiercer still churned. Her hands clutched the doorframe as if the rough wood could anchor her trembling body. Every bolt of lightning lit up the square, and each flash drew the dress closer. Step by step, it turned toward her hut. She tried to shut her eyes, but she could not. The fabric glowed faintly, carrying within it something that should not be: a face. The young woman's face, her stepdaughter's, woven into the cloth as though the threads themselves remembered. It was not solid, not flesh, but luminous, shifting with every ripple of fabric. Her eyes burned with quiet fire, her mouth unmoving yet filled with words that rolled in whispers across the storm. "No," the stepmother's voice cracked. She staggered back, her heart thundering faster than the sky. "You are gone. I sent you away. You cannot be here." But the figure walked forward, unhurried, unstoppable. Each fold of the dress seemed to carry a reflection of the stepmother's deeds. The night in the forest when she struck her stepdaughter down, the lies she spread before the villagers, the mocking laughter as the dress was nailed to the pole. The fabric had become a mirror of memory, each shame stitched into its hem. Her crimes stared back at her. The stepmother covered her ears, but the whispers still crawled through, winding into her skull. Her stepdaughter's voice mingled with the storm, not spoken aloud but resonating from the fabric itself. "Mother, they listened to you. Mother, you drove me to the dark. Mother, you left me with nothing but pain." "No," she screamed, clutching her head. She stumbled into the hut, her shadow jerking along the walls as lightning spilled through the doorway. The whispers followed, seeping through mud walls, vibrating the ground beneath her feet. The sound was inescapable. Her stepdaughter was inside her home now, inside her bones. She grabbed at objects to defend herself, a gourd, a pestle, a knife, but they fell uselessly from her shaking hands. The dress stood in the doorway now, swaying gently, its glowing chains of lightning licking the earth like restless serpents. The faint face in the cloth never blinked, never turned away. The stepmother dropped to her knees, clawing at the ground. "Spirits, forgive me. Ancestors, shield me. I did it for the village, I did it to protect them," she pleaded, her words tumbling over each other. But even as she spoke, the folds of the dress twisted, and within them she saw herself again, not as protector but as liar, as tormentor. The truth was undeniable, embroidered in shame. Tears streaked her face, mixing with the dust beneath her palms. She looked up at the figure, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Please, you are my daughter too. Spare me." The dress shuddered. For a moment, it seemed to ripple in sorrow, as though remembering the bond that once existed. But then lightning struck again, and the sorrow hardened into judgment. The whispers rose into a chant, filling every corner of the hut, rattling the roof, shaking the walls. "You mocked. You lied. You destroyed." The stepmother screamed and crawled backward until her spine hit the wall. Her eyes widened as she saw her own reflection swirling in the fabric now, twisted and monstrous, each lie she had told stitched onto her skin. The image broke her. She clutched her chest, gasping, her heart pounding against her ribs as though it too wanted to flee her body. Her lips trembled, trying to form excuses, but only sobs came. The figure moved one step closer. Its hem brushed the floor of the hut, leaving scorched trails that hissed like serpents. The stepmother's sobs turned to wails, loud enough for villagers still hiding to hear. They shivered in their huts, listening as the storm carried her cries into the night. None dared come near. At last the whispers silenced. Only one word remained, drifting from the cloth into the stepmother's ears, her name. Spoken not with love, not even with hate, but with finality. She collapsed forward, her face buried in the dirt, her body shaking uncontrollably. When she dared to lift her head, the glowing cloth reflected only her own wide, terrified eyes. And she knew, with a certainty that shattered her soul, that she could never escape what she had done. The storm pressed heavier upon the village, as though the clouds themselves bent low to listen. The dress no longer swayed like cloth caught in the wind. It stood firm in the doorway of the stepmother's hut, upright, steady, alive. A hollow, echoing voice poured from it, not from lips but from the very threads that stitched it together. The villagers who had gathered outside gasped and staggered back, some falling to their knees. To the stepmother, the voice boomed, deep as thunder, cold as the grave. The glowing fabric turned its gaze fully upon her, the faint image of the young woman's face shimmering across its folds. "You stripped me of dignity. Now the sky strips you of peace." The words were not merely heard. They were felt. They crawled across the skin, sank into the bones, rattled inside the chest. The stepmother's breath hitched in her throat. She clutched at her ears, desperate to shut out the voice, but the sound was not outside anymore. It was within her, rustling through her thoughts like wind tearing through dry grass. "No, stop. Please," she cried, clawing at her head. She staggered forward, reaching toward the fabric as if to rip it apart, but the moment her hand touched the air around it, lightning cracked overhead. The shock flung her back into the dirt of her hut, her body trembling violently. The villagers whispered in terror. Children clung to their mothers, men covered their faces, women prayed under their breath. None dared intervene. The hollow voice continued, relentless. "You mocked my name. You carved my pain into laughter. You hung my flesh on a pole so the sky itself would weep for me. Now your laughter shall never return. You will live in silence, haunted by every rustle of cloth, every whisper of the wind." The stepmother's eyes bulged with terror. Her mouth opened to scream again, but no sound came. Her voice was gone, ripped from her throat, leaving only an open, gasping silence. She clawed at her neck, desperate to force a cry out, but nothing emerged. The villagers looked on, trembling. Some wept. Some murmured, "It is justice." Her body shook as if caught in fever. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall of her hut. Then, slowly she curled into herself, rocking and clutching her ears as if to keep the whispers at bay. But the sound followed her. To her alone, the rustling of the dress became unbearable, a constant hiss, like cloth sliding endlessly against itself, like thousands of hands brushing against her skin. It filled her mind, growing louder and louder, until it was all she could hear. She collapsed to the ground, convulsing, eyes wide with terror. Tears streamed down her face, her mouth opening and closing in silent screams. Her dignity, once worn like a mask, had been torn away. In its place remained a broken, voiceless shell, forever condemned to hear echoes of the girl she betrayed. The villagers backed away, some shielding their eyes from the sight. "The spirits have spoken," one elder whispered, his voice trembling. "Her judgment is sealed." But the dress did not turn to the stepmother alone. It shifted slowly, deliberately, its faceless gaze sweeping across the square. The villagers felt its eyes on them, though no eyes were there. Some fell to their knees, others fled into the darkness. The storm thundered, lightning splitting the sky as if sealing the judgment with fire. Only when the stepmother collapsed fully into the dirt, her body shaking, her mouth frozen in silence, did the hollow voice fade. The dress stood still, glowing faintly, unmoving as the storm began to break above. The message was clear: her dignity had been mocked, but the spirits had risen to restore it. And the one who had fueled the hatred would never know peace again. At dawn, the village awoke to a silence that felt unnatural. The storm had rolled away, but its memory lingered in the damp earth and the smoke that hung heavy in the air. The square, where laughter and jeers had echoed only a day before, was now hollow with dread. And there, standing upright though no body filled it, the young woman's dress still gleamed faintly in the morning light. Torn, stitched, weathered, yet impossibly alive. The elders gathered first, summoned by fear and responsibility. Their faces were pale with sleeplessness, eyes darting toward the hut where the stepmother lay trembling, voiceless, her hands pressed tightly against her ears as if shielding herself from whispers only she could hear. But the true terror lay in the square, where the cloth moved slightly, swaying though there was no breeze. "We cannot let this remain," one elder muttered, voice quaking. "It is an abomination. It is a curse," another spat, though his eyes betrayed fear. "If we destroy it, perhaps the spirits will release us." Torches were brought. Villagers circled wide, unwilling to come close, whispering prayers under their breath. The youngest elder, trembling, stepped forward and pressed the flame of his torch against the fabric. The fire licked at the hem. For a moment hope flared. But then the flame sputtered, hissed, and died as though water had smothered it. Smoke curled upward and the dress swayed once more, upright, untouched. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some women covered their children's eyes. Others fell to the ground, bowing low, whispering, "It cannot be harmed. It carries her spirit." Again, another elder demanded, though his voice broke halfway. He snatched a torch from one of the men and thrust it at the glowing cloth. This time the fire roared higher, fierce and determined. But then thunder cracked overhead, though the sky had been clear only moments before. Clouds gathered in sudden fury. The wind screamed through the square, scattering dust and knocking the torch from his hand. The villagers screamed and scattered, ducking for cover. The flames sputtered and went out once more, leaving the dress unmarked. The elders looked at one another with hollow eyes. Their power, their judgment had no weight here. Something greater had claimed the dress. Something beyond their understanding. In the days that followed, more attempts were made. They buried it beneath stones, but in the morning the stones were shattered, scattered across the square as though flung away by unseen hands. They tried to cut it to ribbons, but the knife blades bent and broke as if striking iron. One desperate man, mad with fear, tied it to a stake and set a bonfire around it. The flames roared so high they threatened the huts at the edge of the village, but when the smoke cleared, the pole had turned to ash, and the dress stood untouched upon the scorched ground. Each failure brought new storms. Lightning struck closer and closer to the square. Rains came without warning, drenching the earth, ruining food stores. Crops withered under sudden floods. And each time the villagers looked toward the center, they swore the dress gleamed brighter, as though mocking their helplessness. Fear spread like rot. No one dared pass through the square after sunset. Children were hushed if they pointed or stared too long. Women whispered of seeing the faint outline of the young woman's face shimmering across the cloth at night, her eyes watching, her lips moving soundlessly. Men, once bold in their jeers, now avoided the space entirely, crossing the long way around the village to keep their distance. But even in fear, reverence grew. The same voices that once cursed her now murmured prayers at the edge of the square. Some knelt before the dress at dawn, whispering apologies. Others left offerings of food, beads, or cloth, hoping to calm the spirit within. And slowly the villagers began to speak of it differently. It is not cursed, some would say, trembling. It is sacred. It is her spirit watching us. But others, too stubborn to yield, still hissed the word curse. They lived in dread, waiting for storms at every roll of thunder, terrified the fabric would move again. The elders, powerless and broken, could only watch as their authority unraveled. They had tried to burn it, to bury it, to destroy it. Each attempt only summoned storms and fear. Now they bowed their heads in shame and silence, unable to deny the truth. The dress had become more than cloth. It was a symbol, a haunting reminder, a living judgment. The villagers could no longer decide if they lived in the shadow of a curse or under the protection of a sacred spirit. But one thing was certain: the dress would never leave them. It stood in the square, upright and waiting, a constant reminder that cruelty could not be buried, and that humiliation, once sown, could rise again as something far stronger. And when the winds howled through the village at night, many swore they heard the faintest rustle in the cloth, not of fabric but of footsteps. Years passed, and yet the story of the dress refused to fade. The pole in the square, once draped with humiliation, still stood, though bare and weathered by rain. Its wood had cracked, its height shortened by rot, but no one dared remove it. The villagers treated it like a marker, a warning carved into the heart of their lives. They still spoke in hushed tones about that night, the night the torn cloth had risen and walked, the night storms had answered cruelty with fury. Some said the spirit of the girl had found peace. Others argued she lingered, restless and watchful. But whether curse or blessing, all agreed, the dress was no longer just cloth. It had become something eternal. Children grew up listening to the whispers of their parents. "Do not mock the weak," mothers warned, stirring pots by firelight. "Do not shame the innocent," fathers muttered as they patched their roofs. And though no one openly admitted it, fear had carved itself into their traditions. Offerings of beads or food were still placed secretly in the square, left at the foot of the broken pole. None touched them, but by dawn they were always gone. And then came the storms. Every season, when thunder rolled across the sky and lightning carved silver veins across the clouds, the villagers held their breath. For those were the nights when the story said the dress walked again. Some swore they had seen dust stir in the square, though no one walked there. Others whispered of a faint dragging sound, as if cloth brushed against the earth. Dogs barked furiously at nothing, chickens scattered in fright, and the air grew thick with a presence no one could explain. Once a child dared to look. He pressed his face to the crack of his hut and stared into the storm-lashed night. What he saw froze his blood, a dress, tattered and hollow, moving slowly down the path. No body filled it, no face could be seen, yet it swayed with each step as though invisible legs carried it forward. He screamed, and his mother silenced him quickly, pressing her hand over his mouth. "Never look," she hissed. "Never watch her walk." As the years deepened into decades, the legend only grew stronger. The dress was said to travel the paths of the village during storms, unseen feet stirring the dust. Some said it paused before certain huts, the huts of those who had mocked her most cruelly. Those who lived in such homes would wake to whispers in the night, the sound of fabric brushing close, or find strange patterns of ash on their thresholds. The elders, now old and bent, carried the greatest burden. They alone knew how hard they had tried to destroy the dress, and how every attempt had been met with storms that tore apart their homes. They rarely spoke, their guilt too heavy. But sometimes, when lightning lit the square, their eyes widened with terror, as though they saw her standing there again, radiant and untouchable. And still the pole remained. Empty, scarred and splintered, but no one dared pull it down. It was the last tether to the memory, the marker of shame transformed into warning. Children were taught never to laugh when another stumbled, never to scorn the poor, never to strip dignity from anyone. For if they did, the story reminded them the cloth would walk again. On certain nights, when thunder rolled and rain swept the village, the bravest children dared to whisper among themselves. "What if we see her?" one would say, eyes wide. "What if she comes for us?" another would ask, clutching at their friend's hand. And always the oldest child would murmur the warning passed down through generations. "When lightning strikes, do not look toward the forest. For there, at the edge of the trees, the dress dances where no wind blows." Some swore they had seen it, glowing faintly, moving as if alive, each fold of fabric rippling though no storm touched it. Others claimed they had heard laughter, soft and hollow, echoing from the darkness. But whether seen or only imagined, the image lived on. A dress, empty yet filled with something eternal, swaying in the rain, its torn edges glowing white under the lightning's flash. And so the legend remained. The girl they mocked was never forgotten. The humiliation they thought would bury her had instead given birth to something they could never destroy. The pole stood as her monument, the storms as her voice, and the walking dress as her vengeance and her memory. And on stormy nights, when children pulled blankets over their heads and dared not sleep, they whispered one final warning, their voices trembling with both awe and fear. When the sky splits with light, do not watch too closely. For at the forest's edge, the dress still walks, and sometimes it dances.